connection with Antonio's death.
And Ronald was in prison during all of this?
Yes, and this is where the story takes...
Grieve properly. Today, we're diving into a story that challenges our understanding of justice, family bonds, and the system that sometimes tears them apart.
It's a story that really makes you question what we consider justice in our society.
At the center of this story is Ronald Bierend, a father who was incarcerated when his son Antonio was born, and still in prison when his son tragically died.
And what happened next reveals some deeply troubling aspects of our legal system.
Can you walk us through what actually happened?
Diving into the heartbreaking story of Ronald Eugene Bierend and his fight against a system that failed him at every turn.
This case really exposes the deep cracks in our justice system.
According to the records, Antonio Gunrali was just 2.5 years old when he was found dead in his crib in Los Lunas, New Mexico.
Particularly how it treats incarcerated parents.
Let's start with Ronald's story. What happened here?
Well, Ronald was incarcerated when his son Antonio was born, and tragically was still in prison when Antonio died at just 2.5 years old.
That's heartbreaking.
The child had been living with his mother, Barbara Gurley, and her friend Jeffrey Moody, who was later charged in connection with Antonio's death.
That's devastating. And then the system failed him again, right?
Yes, Antonio was killed while in state custody, and there was a settlement. But here's where it gets really troubling. Ronald
was in prison during all of this?
Yes, and this is where the story takes an even more troubling turn. Ronald was not only denied access to information about his son's death, but was also systematically excluded from the legal proceedings that followed.
Was disqualified from receiving the settlement money because he hadn't paid child support during his incarceration.
Wait,
How could that happen?
The
how was he supposed to pay child support while in prison?
That's
system used his incarceration against him in multiple ways.
exactly the point. He was only making 10 cents an hour in prison. They had actually told him the child support would reset when he got out.
And
His mail was reportedly withheld, his name was forged on documents, and he wasn't notified about court dates regarding his son's estate.
then they used that against him?
Precisely. But it gets worse. His mail was withheld, his name was forged, and he never even got to attend the court dates to defend himself.
This seems to be part of a much bigger problem with accountability in our justice system.
That seems legally questionable at best.
It absolutely was. They disqualified him from receiving his son's estate money because he hadn't paid child support while incarcerated.
Absolutely right. Looking at recent studies, there's an alarming lack of real accountability for judicial and prosecutorial misconduct.
Can you elaborate on that?
According to recent research, while judges and prosecutors are technically accountable in theory, in practice, they rarely face consequences for serious professional errors or misconduct.
That's concerning.
But how could he pay child support from prison?
That's exactly the point. He was only making 10 cents an hour in prison. There was literally no way he could meet those obligations.
How widespread is this issue?
In the past 20 years, there have been virtually no cases of judges or prosecutors being held accountable for their actions in wrongful conviction cases.
That's pretty shocking when you think about the impact these decisions have on people's lives.
And what happened to the estate money?
It was given to Antonio's stepfather instead.
This raises some serious
Ronald's stepfather.
questions about how we treat incarcerated parents' rights.
It really does. And it's not just about the money. Ronald was even denied the chance to attend his son's funeral.
That seems particularly cruel.
And it creates a cycle. This leniency actually emboldens misconduct and keeps the gates open to wrongful convictions.
What's even more concerning is that there was apparently some questionable fundraising activity after Antonio's death.
What do you mean?
Well, according to reports, Barbara Gurley set up a GoFundMe page asking for $2,000 for Antonio's funeral expenses.
Was that necessary?
No, actually. CYFD was already covering all funeral-related costs, and Barbara was well aware of this.
This whole situation seems to highlight how the system can fail on multiple levels.
Let's go back to Ronald's case. What happened to the settlement money?
It was given to Antonio's stepfather instead. They essentially used Ronald's incarceration to completely cut him out of the picture.
That
I'm sorry, Ronald's stepfather. Donald Harold Beggs.
seems to go against basic principles of justice.
It absolutely does.
And it's particularly poignant because Antonio had previously been in foster care with a family that truly loved him.
Really? What happened there?
And it highlights how the system can strip away not just freedom, but fundamental parental rights.
The Montoyas had Antonio from when he was just 2 months old. They tried to adopt him legally, but CYFD returned him to his biological mother in June.
And how long after that did the tragedy occur?
Just a few months. The foster parents were devastated, and they weren't even allowed to attend the funeral.
Are there any efforts to reform these systemic issues?
Yes, actually. The Reform Advocacy Institute was established specifically to address these kinds of systemic failures.
What kind of work do they do?
They focus on educating advocates about building and activating targeted campaigns for legislative reform.
This seems to be a pattern, people who cared about Antonio being shut out.
Exactly. And it raises important questions about how we handle these complex family situations in our legal system.
Let's talk about Ronald's testament. What was he trying to achieve with it?
His testament was essentially a cry for justice, documenting the systematic failures that prevented him from being involved in his son's life and death.
And has it had any impact?
While it hasn't changed his personal situation, it has helped shed light on the broader issues facing incarcerated parents.
You know, this reminds me of how New Mexico has historically handled complex family situations.
Yes, there's actually a rich history of legal precedents in New Mexico regarding family rights and inheritance.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, looking at historical records like the Gurule family wills from as far back as 1761, we see how seriously family rights and inheritance were taken.
That's quite a contrast to Ronald's situation.
Absolutely. In those historical cases, even servants were provided for in wills. Yet here we have a father being completely denied his parental rights.
It really makes you think about how our justice system has evolved or devolved over time.
They're particularly focused on criminal justice reform.
That's encouraging. Are they seeing any success?
They are. They've achieved several milestones in criminal justice reform, though clearly there's still a long way to go.
And not necessarily for the better in all cases.
What do you think needs to change?
First and foremost, we need better protections for incarcerated parents' rights, especially in cases involving their children's welfare.
And better communication systems?
Yes, the fact that Ronald's mail was withheld and he wasn't notified of court dates is completely unacceptable in a modern justice system.
It seems like there needs to be more oversight.
Definitely. And we need to address the Catch-22 of expecting incarcerated parents to pay child support while making it impossible for them to do so.
Interesting how cases like Ronald's can expose these deeper systemic issues.
Exactly. And it's not just about the money, it's about the bond he was trying to establish with his son, which the system effectively prevented.
You mentioned earlier about mail being withheld. How common is that kind of interference?
Unfortunately, it's part of a broader pattern. Recent studies have shown significant issues with communication barriers for incarcerated parents.
That's a really important point.
And we need to consider how these policies affect children too. In this case, Antonio was the one who ultimately suffered the most.
It's a tragic reminder of how system failures can have devastating real-world consequences.
And how those consequences often fall hardest on the most vulnerable among us.
And this affects their legal rights too, right?
Absolutely. When you can't receive legal notices or attend court dates, you're effectively denied due process.
It seems like there's a disconnect between what the law promises and what actually happens.
That's right. As one judge recently noted, equal justice under law often comes with unstated exceptions.
What kind of exceptions?
Well, research shows that factors like wealth, social status, and even athletic ability can significantly impact judicial decisions.
That's pretty far from equal justice.
And in Ronald's case, his incarceration was used as a justification to deny him both his parental rights and financial compensation.
It's like a...
Do you think Ronald's testament will help prevent similar situations in the future?
It's hard to say, but at the very least, it provides documented evidence of these systemic failures that advocates can use to push for change.
That's something, at least.
And it gives voice to others who might be experiencing similar situations but unable to speak up.
Which is crucial for creating change.
Exactly. Sometimes it takes these individual stories to highlight the larger systemic issues that need addressing.
As we wrap up, what do you think is the most important lesson from this story?
That justice isn't truly justice if it excludes anyone, even those who are incarcerated, from their fundamental rights as parents.
And that the consequences of these systemic failures can be devastating.
Absolutely. We need to do better, for the Ronalds and Antonios of the world, and for all families affected by incarceration.
Thank you for helping us understand this complex and heartbreaking story.
Thank you for giving it the attention it deserves.
Double punishment.
Triple, really. He lost his freedom, his son, and then his right to compensation for his son's death.
Are there any protections being put in place to prevent this kind of situation?
There are some emerging reforms. The Supreme Court recently strengthened whistleblower protections, which could help expose these kinds of systemic failures.
But that's after the fact, right? What about preventing these situations?
That's the bigger challenge. We need fundamental changes in how the system treats incarcerated parents and their rights.
What would those changes look like?
They'd need to include guaranteed access to legal proceedings, protection of parental rights, and fair consideration of circumstances like inability to pay child support while incarcerated.
That sounds like common sense.
Common sense isn't always common practice in our legal system, unfortunately.
How has Ronald's case influenced advocacy efforts?
His testimony has become a powerful example of how systemic failures can compound tragedy. It's being used to push for reforms in both incarceration and parental rights policies.
And what about accountability for the officials involved?
That's still a major issue. Current accountability systems are largely ineffective at addressing this kind of systemic misconduct.
It seems like we're talking about changing entire institutional cultures.
Exactly. And that's why cases like Ronald's are so important. They show us exactly where and how the system needs to change.
What can ordinary people do to support these changes?
Supporting advocacy organizations, speaking up about these issues, and pushing for legislative reform are all crucial steps.
And staying informed about cases like Ronald's?
Absolutely. These stories need to be told and remembered if we want to see real change.
Looking ahead, what gives you hope for reform?
The increasing attention to these issues and the growing number of advocacy organizations focused on systemic reform.
And what concerns you most?
The persistence of these systemic failures, despite clear evidence of their devastating impact on families like Ronald's.
So what's the key takeaway from Ronald's story?
That justice isn't just about laws on paper, it's about how those laws are applied and who they protect or fail to protect in practice.
And that's something we all need to care about.
Because any one of us could find ourselves or our loved ones caught in these systemic failures.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Co-Pilot Podcasts. Remember, system failure isn't just about broken processes, it's about broken promises to people like Ronald Eugene Byron, who deserved better from the institutions meant to serve justice.
And until we fix these systemic issues, we'll continue to see more stories like his.
Thank you for joining us today. Keep questioning, keep advocating, and keep pushing for change.